The suds dripped from Gwen's fingers as she scrubbed the last of the dinner plates, the fluorescent lights of the galley casting harsh shadows across the cramped space. Another 16-hour shift in the bows of the USS Meridian. Another day of being invisible among the crew of 300. She rolled up her sleeves to keep them dry, revealing the intricate tattoo that wrapped around her left forearm, a trident surrounded by swirling waves, its three prongs gleaming with detailed shading that seemed to move in the flickering light. Captain Martinez appeared in the doorway without warning, his weathered face scanning the galley with practiced efficiency. His eyes swept past the industrial dishwashers, the stainless steel counters, and then froze on Gwen's exposed forearm. The coffee mug in his hand trembled slightly as recognition dawned across his features. "Petty Officer Reynolds," his voice cut through the mechanical hum of the ship's engines. "We need to talk." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks earlier, Gwen had stepped aboard the USS Meridian at Naval Station Norfolk with nothing but a duffel bag and orders that relegated her to the most mundane duties the Navy had to offer: kitchen prep, dish duty, cleaning the mess. Work that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied, which was exactly how she preferred it these days. The destroyer was scheduled for a 6-month deployment to the Mediterranean, part of a routine patrol mission that would take them through some of the most historically significant waters on Earth. For most of the crew, it represented adventure, career advancement, or at least a break from the monotony of stateside duty. For Gwen, it meant 6 months of anonymity, 6 months where nobody would ask questions about her previous assignments or wonder why a decorated Navy SEAL had requested transfer to food service. Chief Petty Officer Williams ran the galley with military precision and surprising kindness. A 20-year veteran with graying temples and laugh lines earned from countless deployments, he'd taken one look at Gwen's service record and decided not to pry. "Reynolds, you're overqualified for potato peeling," he'd said on her first day, watching her expertly handle a knife with movements too fluid for someone who'd supposedly spent their career in administrative roles. "But if this is where you want to be, this is where you'll be. Just don't make the rest of my staff look bad." The work suited her. There was something meditative about the repetitive tasks, the controlled environment, the predictable rhythms of meal preparation and cleanup. She could lose herself in the mechanical motions, let her mind drift to safer places than the memories that had driven her from her previous life. The other galley staff, mostly young sailors fresh out of boot camp, accepted her quiet efficiency without question. She kept to herself, did her work, and slowly began to feel something resembling peace. The USS Meridian itself was a marvel of modern naval engineering. At 509 feet long and displacing over 9,000 tons, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer bristled with advanced radar systems, missile launchers, and electronic warfare capabilities that could engage threats from sea, air, or beneath the waves. Captain Martinez commanded the vessel with the steady competence of someone who'd spent 30 years earning his way up through the ranks, and his crew respected him for both his tactical brilliance and his genuine concern for their welfare. Gwen had observed him during the few occasions when duty brought her into contact with the command structure. Unlike many career officers she'd known, Martinez seemed to actually see the enlisted personnel under his command. He knew names, remembered personal details, and had a reputation for fairness that extended throughout the fleet, which made his sudden interest in a lowly galley worker all the more puzzling. The morning everything changed had started like any other. Dawn broke gray and choppy over the Atlantic as the Meridian maintained its eastward heading toward the Strait of Gibraltar. Gwen had been up since 400, helping prepare breakfast for the crew, industrial quantities of eggs, bacon, and coffee that would fuel another day at sea. The galley operated like a well-oiled machine, each person knowing their role and executing it with practiced efficiency. By 10:30 hours, the breakfast cleanup was complete and preparations for lunch were already underway. Gwen had volunteered for dish duty, partially because it kept her out of the more social aspects of meal preparation, and partially because the mindless scrubbing gave her time to think. She'd been working through a particularly stubborn pan when Chief Williams approached with the day's menu modifications. "Supply delivered some fresh fish to the freezer yesterday," he'd said, consulting his clipboard. "Captain's requested we serve it tonight instead of the planned chicken. Think you can handle prep duty this afternoon?" The request had surprised her. Fish preparation required significantly more skill than basic galley work, and she'd been careful not to demonstrate abilities that might draw unwanted attention. But Williams was looking at her expectantly, and refusing would have been more suspicious than accepting. "Of course, Chief. What kind of fish?" "Atlantic cod, about 60 pounds worth. Should feed the whole crew if we supplement with the usual sides." He'd paused, studying her with the kind of look that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. "You do know your way around a filleting knife, don't you, Reynolds?" The question carried weight beyond its surface meaning, but Gwen had simply nodded and returned to her dishes. In the Navy, everyone had secrets, and the unspoken rule was that you didn't pry unless operational security demanded it. Chief Williams was good at respecting boundaries, which was one of the reasons she'd been able to maintain her low profile for as long as she had. The afternoon fish preparation had gone smoothly. Too smoothly, perhaps. Gwen's hands had moved with automatic precision, breaking down the cod with efficiency that spoke of years of field training rather than galley experience. She'd filleted, portioned, and seasoned 60 pounds of fish in less than 2 hours, a task that should have taken the better part of the afternoon for someone with her supposed background. But it wasn't the fish preparation that had betrayed her. It was the simple act of washing dishes that evening, sleeves rolled up against the heat and steam, that had finally exposed the one thing she'd never been able to hide. The tattoo on her forearm wasn't just decorative art, it was a marker, a symbol recognized by those who knew what to look for. The Trident design was specific, detailed, and unmistakable to anyone familiar with the iconography of America's most elite military units. Each element, from the positioning of the 3 prongs to the style of the surrounding waves, told a story of training, deployment, and service that couldn't be faked or replicated. Gwen had gotten the tattoo during her 3rd deployment, in a small parlor outside the naval base in San Diego. It had been a moment of pride, a permanent reminder of what she'd accomplished and who she'd become. She'd never imagined it would one day become a liability, a beacon that could expose her carefully constructed anonymity with a single glance. Now, standing in the galley with Captain Martinez's eyes fixed on her exposed forearm, she realized that her months of hiding were about to come to an end. The water dripped from her hands onto the deck as she slowly turned to face him, her mind already calculating exits, alternatives, and explanations that might preserve what remained of her cover. But Martinez's expression wasn't one of suspicion or anger. It was something far more complex, recognition mixed with concern, and beneath that, something that might have been relief. Captain Martinez's office occupied a corner of the destroyer's superstructure, its small porthole offering a view of the endless ocean that stretched to the horizon. The space was cramped but efficiently organized, with charts covering one wall and commendations dating back 15 years lining another. Gwen sat rigidly in the chair across from his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from trembling. "Staff Sergeant Gwen Reynolds, formerly of SEAL Team 4, Martinez said quietly, reading from a classified file that had materialized from his safe. Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart, 37 confirmed operations across 4 theaters, instructor qualification at Bud's training facility." He looked up from the papers. "What the hell are you doing washing dishes on my ship?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. She'd prepared for interrogation, for accusations, for the careful verbal dance that usually accompanied blown cover. But Martinez was asking the one question she hadn't expected, not what she was hiding, but why she was hiding it. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted. And close the door first. This conversation stays between us until I decide otherwise." Gwen secured the hatch and returned to her seat. For several moments, she studied Martinez's weathered face, looking for signs of the judgment or pity she'd grown accustomed to receiving. Instead, she found only patient attention and something that might have been understanding. "Operation Neptune's Gate," she began, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "6 months ago, off the coast of Yemen. Intelligence indicated a high-value target was meeting with arms dealers on a cargo vessel in international waters. Clean extraction mission, minimal risk assessment. Martinez leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more serious. He'd heard whispers about Neptune's Gate through classified channels, an operation that had gone catastrophically wrong, though the details remained buried under layers of operational security. My team inserted via submarine 12 miles from the target vessel. 4 operators, perfect weather conditions, textbook approach. We boarded under cover of darkness, secured the target, and were preparing for extraction when everything went sideways. Gwen's voice remained steady, but her knuckles had turned white. The intelligence was wrong. It wasn't an arms deal. It was a trap. 26 hostiles waiting in ambush positions throughout the ship. The silence in the cabin was broken only by the distant hum of the Meridian's engines and the occasional creak of metal under stress. Martinez had stopped reading the file, his full attention focused on the woman across from his desk. We fought our way to the extraction point, but by then the helicopter was taking heavy fire. The pilot managed to get us out, but not before. She paused, drawing a slow breath. Petty Officer David Chen, 23 years old, married 6 months ago. He took a round meant for me while covering our retreat. Martinez nodded slowly. He'd lost men under his command, knew the weight that settles in your chest and never quite left. But there was more to this story, something beyond the standard tragedy of combat operations gone wrong. The after-action review cleared your team of any wrongdoing, he said, consulting the file again. Intelligence failure, not operational failure. Your actions under fire saved 3 lives and completed the mission objective despite overwhelming odds. The review board didn't see Chen's wife at the funeral. Gwen's composure cracked slightly. Didn't watch his parents receive a folded flag because their son died following my orders. Clean paperwork doesn't change the fact that I brought him home in a body bag. So you requested a transfer to food service. It wasn't a question. Martinez had seen similar cases before. Elite operators who couldn't bear the weight of command after losing someone under their care. Some transferred to training positions, others left the military entirely. Few chose kitchen duty on a destroyer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I needed time to think, to figure out whether I still belonged in the teams, whether I could trust my judgment when lives were on the line. Galley work seemed like the safest place to do that thinking. She met his eyes directly. I didn't expect anyone to recognize the ink. Martinez closed the file and locked it back in his safe before turning to face her. 28 years I've been in the Navy. I started as an enlisted sailor, worked my way up through every rank between seaman recruit and captain. You know what I've learned in all that time? Gwen waited, unsure where this was heading. The best leaders are the ones who understand the cost of leadership, the ones who felt the weight of responsibility and been crushed by it, then found the strength to carry it anyway. He stood and moved to the porthole, gazing out at the darkening sea. What happened in Yemen wasn't your fault, Staff Sergeant, but if you're determined to carry that guilt, at least carry it somewhere it can do some good. Sir, we're 3 days out from entering the Mediterranean. Intelligence suggests increased piracy activity in the region, possibly coordinated by a criminal organization with military-grade equipment. My crew is good, but they're young and untested. Most of them have never seen real combat. He turned back to face her. I could use someone with your experience helping to prepare them for what we might face. The proposal hung between them like a challenge. Gwen felt something stir in her chest, not quite hope, but perhaps the distant possibility of redemption. What exactly are you suggesting, Captain? Officially, you remain assigned to food service. Unofficially, you assist with advanced combat training for selected personnel. Small unit tactics, close quarters combat, threat assessment, skills that might prove valuable if things get complicated. Martinez returned to his chair. No pressure, Staff Sergeant. The galley will always be there if you decide you're not ready. But I think David Chen would want his sacrifice to mean something more than perfectly clean dishes. The mention of Chen's name hit harder than any direct order could have. Gwen closed her eyes, seeing again the young petty officer's face in those final moments before the helicopter lifted off. He'd been talking about his plans for leave, about taking his wife to visit Niagara Falls, about the life he was building outside the military. Dreams that died with him on that cargo ship deck. "I'll need to see the crew personnel files," she said finally. "Identify candidates with the right physical and psychological profiles for advanced training, and I'll need access to training facilities during off-duty hours." Already arranged. Martinez smiled for the first time since summoning her to his office. "Master Chief Phillips will provide whatever resources you need. He's old school, been on destroyers longer than some of my officers have been alive. He understands the value of unconventional preparation." "How much does the crew know about the potential threats we're facing?" "Standard briefing materials only. I've kept the more detailed intelligence assessments restricted to senior staff. No point in creating panic over threats that might not materialize." Martinez pulled out a different file, this one marked with current operational codes. "But between you and me, the situation is more serious than we've let on. 3 merchant vessels have gone missing in the past month, all in waters we'll be patrolling. No distress calls, no wreckage, no survivors." Gwen felt the familiar tingle of operational awareness, the mental shift that occurred when abstract threats became concrete possibilities. It had been 6 months since she'd felt that particular clarity, and she was surprised by how much she'd missed it. "Pirates don't make ships disappear without a trace," she observed. "That suggests military-level planning and execution, possibly state-sponsored, or at least state-equipped." "My thoughts exactly. Which is why I need someone with your background helping to prepare my people for scenarios that go beyond standard naval operations." Martinez stood again, extending his hand. "Welcome back to the fight, Staff Sergeant Reynolds." The training deck deep in the Meridian's hull had been cleared of its usual equipment, replaced with mats, obstacle courses, and combat training gear that Master Chief Phillips had somehow procured from the ship's stores. At 0530 hours, 12 carefully selected sailors stood at attention, their faces mixing curiosity with apprehension as they waited to discover why they'd been summoned for special preparedness training. Gwen studied each face, mentally cataloging what she'd learned from their personnel files. Seaman Jackson, 19, from rural Montana. Excellent marksman with a natural aptitude for tactical thinking. Petty Officer Martinez, no relation to the captain, former high school wrestler with the kind of stubborn determination that makes good operators. Fire Controlman Hayes, quiet and methodical, the type who stays calm under pressure and thought 3 moves ahead. He turned back to face her. "My name is Petty Officer Reynolds," she began. "For the next 3 weeks, I'll be teaching you skills that aren't part of standard Navy training. Skills that might save your life and the lives of your shipmates if we encounter hostile forces in the Mediterranean." Seaman Rodriguez raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, are we expecting combat? I thought this was a routine patrol mission." "In my experience, Seaman, no mission stays routine once you leave friendly waters. The Mediterranean has seen more naval conflicts than any other body of water in human history. We're going to make sure you're prepared for whatever we might face." She gestured toward the training equipment. "Today, we start with close-quarters combat, not the kind you learned in boot camp, but the kind that works when someone's trying to kill you with their hands." The first session revealed both the potential and limitations of her selected trainees. Most had the basic fitness and discipline expected of Navy personnel, but they moved with the careful deliberation of people who'd never faced genuine violence. Their strikes were textbook perfect, but lacked the decisive brutality necessary for survival combat. They hesitated at crucial moments, pulled punches that should have been committed fully, and telegraphed their intentions with body language that would get them killed against experienced fighters. But there were promising signs. Jackson adapted quickly to the grappling techniques, using his farm boy strength intelligently rather than relying on brute force. Martinez showed natural aggression that needed channeling rather than developing. Hayes absorbed every lesson with the methodical precision of someone building a mental database of techniques. Combat isn't about fighting fair, Gwen explained as she demonstrated a disarming technique on Petty Officer Kim. It's about surviving and completing your mission. Every move you make should either incapacitate your opponent or position you for a move that will. Hesitation kills operators. Mercy kills teams. She released Kim, who rubbed his wrist where she'd applied pressure to a nerve cluster. The human body has dozens of vulnerable points that can be exploited with minimal force if you know where to strike and how to strike effectively. But knowledge without commitment is useless. You have to be willing to hurt people, because they're certainly willing to hurt you. The afternoon session focused on small unit tactics and urban warfare scenarios. Using chalk marks on the deck, Gwen outlined the floor plan of a cargo ship similar to the one where Chen had died. The parallel wasn't lost on her, but she pushed the memories aside and focused on the tactical problem at hand. 4-man teams, standard room-clearing procedures. Jackson, you're a point man. Martinez, you're covering his 6. Hayes, you've got the technical equipment. Kim, you're rear security. She positioned them at the imaginary entrance to the cargo hold. Your mission is to secure this compartment and neutralize any hostiles inside without damaging the sensitive equipment stored here. What followed was a series of simulated assaults that revealed just how unprepared standard Navy training left sailors for ground combat operations. They bunched up in doorways, creating perfect targets for enemy fire. They cleared rooms too slowly, giving hidden adversaries time to establish better positions. They communicated poorly, using verbal commands when hand signals would have been more appropriate. But they learned quickly. By the end of the afternoon, Jackson's team was moving with something resembling tactical proficiency. They understood angles and fields of fire, the importance of controlled aggression, the difference between cover and concealment. Most importantly, they were beginning to think like a cohesive unit rather than 4 individuals trying to complete the same task. Not bad for day 1, Gwen admitted as they secured the training equipment. Tomorrow, we'll work on weapons handling and marksmanship under stress. Real combat isn't like the shooting range. Your heart rate will be elevated, your fine motor control will be compromised, and people will be shooting back. That evening, Chief Williams approached her during the dinner cleanup with an expression of barely contained curiosity. "Heard you've been running some kind of advanced training program down on the training deck? Word is you've got half the crew wondering who the hell you really are." "Just helping out with some preparedness exercises," Gwen replied, focusing intently on the pot she was scrubbing. "Captain Martinez thought it might be useful given our deployment area." "Right, and I suppose those preparedness exercises just happened to include techniques that looked suspiciously like special operations training to anyone who knows what to look for." Williams leaned against the counter, studying her profile. "You know, I served on a carrier that had a SEAL team attached for a Mediterranean deployment back in '03. Got to watch some of their training sessions. Interesting how much your teaching style resembles theirs." The observation hung between them like an unspoken question. Williams wasn't pushing for answers, but he was making it clear that her cover wasn't as secure as she'd hoped. Other crew members were starting to notice inconsistencies, asking questions that might eventually reach the wrong ears. "Chief, if you've got concerns about my performance or qualifications—" "Hell no," he interrupted. "Best damn galley worker I've had in 15 years, and that includes people who actually wanted to be here. Just saying that word gets around on a ship this size. Might want to think about that when you're deciding how much of yourself to reveal." The warning was delivered with paternal concern rather than threat, but its implications were clear. The crew was beginning to suspect that Petty Officer Reynolds wasn't exactly who she appeared to be. How long before those suspicions reached someone who might connect the dots in dangerous ways? Later that night, Gwen stood on the destroyer's fantail, watching the ship's wake disappear into darkness. The Mediterranean lay ahead, with all its historical significance and modern dangers. Establish better positions. They communicated poorly, using verbal commands when hand signals would have been more appropriate. But they learned quickly. By the end of the afternoon, Jackson's team was moving with something resembling tactical proficiency. They understood angles and fields of fire, the importance of controlled aggression, the difference between cover and concealment. Most importantly, they were beginning to think like a cohesive unit rather than four individuals trying to complete the same task. "Not bad for day one," Gwen admitted as they secured the training equipment. "Tomorrow, we'll work on weapons handling and marksmanship under stress. Real combat isn't like the shooting range. Your heart rate will be elevated, your fine motor control will be compromised, and people will be shooting back." That evening, Chief Williams approached her during the dinner cleanup with an expression of barely contained curiosity. "Heard you've been running some kind of advanced training program down on the training deck. Word is you've got half the crew wondering who the hell you really are." "Just helping out with some preparedness exercises," Gwen replied, focusing intently on the pot she was scrubbing. "Captain Martinez thought it might be useful given our deployment area." "Right, and I suppose those preparedness exercises just happened to include techniques that looked suspiciously like special operations training to anyone who knows what to look for." Williams leaned against the counter, studying her profile. "You know, I served on a carrier that had a SEAL team attached for a Mediterranean deployment back in '03. Got to watch some of their training sessions. Interesting how much your teaching style resembles theirs." The observation hung between them like an unspoken question. Williams wasn't pushing for answers, but he was making it clear that her cover wasn't as secure as she'd hoped. Other crew members were starting to notice inconsistencies, asking questions that might eventually reach the wrong ears. "Chief, if you've got concerns about my performance or qualifications—" "Hell no," he interrupted. "Best damn galley worker I've had in 15 years. And that includes people who actually wanted to be here. Just saying that word gets around on a ship this size. Might want to think about that when you're deciding how much of yourself to reveal." The warning was delivered with paternal concern rather than threat, but its implications were clear. The crew was beginning to suspect that Petty Officer Reynolds wasn't exactly who she appeared to be. How long before those suspicions reached someone who might connect the dots in dangerous ways? Later that night, Gwen stood on the destroyer's fantail, watching the ship's wake disappear into darkness. The Mediterranean lay ahead, with all its historical significance and modern dangers. In 3 days, they would pass through the Strait of Gibraltar and enter waters where 3 ships had vanished without explanation. Her students were improving rapidly, but they remained months away from the proficiency level she'd prefer for actual combat operations. The irony wasn't lost on her. 6 months ago, she'd been running from the responsibility of command, seeking anonymity in the most mundane duties the Navy could offer. Now she found herself preparing young sailors for the kind of violence she'd hoped to leave behind, knowing that her instruction might be the only thing standing between them and the fate that had claimed David Chen. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Captain Martinez. "Intelligence update received. Recommend accelerating training schedule. The situation is developing faster than anticipated." Gwen deleted the message and headed below deck. Tomorrow's training session would focus on combat marksmanship and tactical communication under stress. If intelligence was correct, her students might need those skills sooner than any of them had expected. The USS Meridian passed through the Strait of Gibraltar at dawn, the ancient Pillars of Hercules rising majestically on either side as the destroyer entered the Mediterranean Sea. From the bridge, Captain Martinez watched the sun paint the Rock of Gibraltar in shades of gold and amber, while his navigation team plotted their course toward the patrol area where 3 merchant vessels had disappeared. Below decks, Gwen was conducting what she privately called stress inoculation training with her expanded group of 16 sailors. The ship's small arms locker had been opened to provide live ammunition for what appeared to be routine weapons proficiency testing, but the scenarios she'd designed went far beyond standard Navy marksmanship requirements. "Seaman Jackson, you've got 30 seconds to neutralize 4 targets while under simulated enemy fire," she announced, activating a sound system that filled the enclosed range with the deafening noise of gunfire and explosions. Strobe lights flickered chaotically, simulating muzzle flashes and the disorienting effects of combat lighting. Your heart rate is already elevated from the sprint you just completed. Your fine motor control is compromised. Make every shot count. Jackson steadied his M4 carbine, controlled his breathing despite the cacophony surrounding him, and began engaging targets with methodical precision. His first shot went slightly wide, adrenaline affecting his aim despite weeks of training. But he adjusted quickly, compensating for the physiological effects of stress, and put the remaining rounds exactly where they needed to go. Better, Gwen acknowledged as the simulation ended and normal lighting returned. Combat shooting isn't about perfect form, it's about effective hits under impossible conditions. Hayes, you're up next. Same scenario, but this time you're protecting a wounded teammate while engaging multiple hostiles. Fire Controlman Hayes nodded grimly and took position. The scenarios were becoming more complex each day, incorporating elements that standard Navy training never addressed. Tactical decision-making under extreme stress, combat medical procedures, urban warfare techniques that might prove vital if they encountered the forces responsible for the missing merchant ships. Between training sessions, disturbing intelligence continued to filter down from the bridge. The merchant vessel Diana's Fortune had last been seen 72 hours ago, approximately 300 nautical miles from their current position. No distress call, no wreckage, no trace of the 30-person crew. Satellite imagery showed the ship's last known position, then nothing, as if it had simply ceased to exist. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, the ship's intelligence officer, had been working around the clock to piece together patterns from the disappearances. A Naval Academy graduate with a master's degree in international relations, Walsh possessed both the analytical skills and security clearances necessary to access the classified intelligence that might explain what they were facing. The pattern is too precise to be random piracy, she explained to the senior staff during the morning briefing. Each vessel was taken in international waters, outside any nation's territorial jurisdiction. No ransom demands, no bodies, no evidence of the ships being sold on the black market. Someone is making them disappear completely. Captain Martinez studied the digital chart displaying the locations of the 3 disappearances. What about the cargo manifests? Any common elements that might indicate why these specific ships were targeted? That's where it gets interesting, sir. The Mediterranean Star was carrying agricultural equipment to Egypt. Blessed Virgin had a mixed cargo of consumer electronics and automotive parts destined for various European ports. Diana's Fortune was transporting construction materials and heavy machinery to Tunisia. Walsh highlighted the shipping routes on her presentation screen. Different origins, different destinations, different cargo types. The only commonality is that all 3 vessels were traveling through this specific corridor. She indicated a section of sea roughly 200 miles long and 50 miles wide, positioned strategically between the major shipping lanes that connected Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. It was an area where vessels routinely passed but rarely lingered, international waters where no single nation maintained a significant naval presence. Perfect hunting ground, observed Master Chief Phillips, his weathered face grim with understanding. Remote enough to operate without interference, busy enough to provide regular targets. Whoever's doing this has studied the shipping patterns and chosen their operational area very carefully. The briefing was interrupted by a priority message from Fleet Command. Captain Martinez read the encrypted communication with growing concern, his expression darkening as he absorbed the implications of the new intelligence. Gentlemen, the situation has escalated. 40 minutes ago, the Italian Coast Guard received a partial distress call from the cargo vessel Northern Gateway. The transmission was cut off mid-sentence, but they managed to broadcast their position before losing communications. He updated the chart display. They're 68 nautical miles from our current position. The bridge erupted in controlled activity as the Meridian altered course toward the distress signal. Orders were passed to the engine room for maximum sustainable speed, while the weapons systems were brought to a higher state of readiness. This represented their first opportunity to respond to one of these incidents in real time, possibly their only chance to discover what had happened to the missing vessels and their crews. Gwen felt the subtle vibration through the ship's hull as the destroyer's engines increased power, pushing them toward whatever awaited at the coordinates of the Northern Gateway's last transmission. In the galley, normal meal preparation continued under Chief Williams's steady supervision, but an undercurrent of tension had infected the entire crew. Word travels fast aboard ship, and everyone understood that their routine patrol mission had suddenly become something far more dangerous. She found herself thinking about her training group, wondering if the accelerated program had prepared them adequately for actual combat. Jackson showed natural leadership qualities that reminded her of David Chen at that age, earnest, dedicated, still believing that good training and careful preparation could overcome any threat. Martinez had developed into a competent point man, aggressive when necessary but controlled in his application of force. Hayes possessed the technical skills and calm temperament that made excellent support personnel. But they were still fundamentally untested, their skills developed in the controlled environment of training scenarios rather than forged in the chaos of real combat. If they encountered whatever force had been preying on merchant shipping, her students might face adversaries with military-grade equipment and professional training. The thought of watching more young sailors die under her guidance sent a familiar chill through her chest. The ship's intercom crackled to life with Captain Martinez's voice. "All hands, this is the captain. We are proceeding to investigate a distress call from a merchant vessel that may have encountered the hostile forces operating in this area. All departments are to maintain heightened readiness and be prepared to implement emergency protocols on short notice. This is not a drill." As the announcement echoed through the galley, Gwen caught Chief Williams watching her with an expression of knowing concern. He'd served long enough to recognize the signs, the subtle tension in her posture, the way her hands moved unconsciously to check equipment that wasn't there, the thousand-yard stare that came with anticipating combat. "Reynolds," he said quietly, "whatever's waiting for us out there, you make sure you bring my people back safely. All of them." It wasn't a request, it was a charge, the kind of responsibility she'd tried to escape by hiding in the galley. But as the Meridian raced toward the coordinates where the northern gateway had vanished, Gwen realized that some responsibilities couldn't be avoided, only postponed. The northern gateway appeared on the Meridian's radar at 1347 hours, a stationary contact floating dead in the water 37 miles ahead. Through high-powered binoculars, the lookouts could make out the silhouette of a medium-sized cargo vessel listing slightly the starboard, her superstructure dark and lifeless against the azure Mediterranean backdrop. "No movement visible on deck," reported Petty Officer Kim from the crow's nest. "No response to our radio hails on any frequency. She's just sitting there like a ghost ship." Captain Martinez stood on the bridge wing, studying the distant vessel through his own binoculars while his tactical team prepared for what might be their first direct encounter with the forces responsible for the recent disappearances. The scene felt wrong, too convenient, too exposed. Professional pirates didn't abandon valuable cargo ships in broad daylight, and military raiders wouldn't leave evidence floating for other naval forces to discover. "Sonar, anything unusual below the surface?" Martinez called down to the sonar room. "Negative, Captain. No submerged contacts within 5 nautical miles. But there's something odd about the acoustic signature from the cargo ship. Her engines are completely cold, like she's been dead in the water for hours, but there's still some kind of electrical activity aboard." The observation sent a chill through the bridge crew. Electrical activity meant either survivors trying to restore power or someone else controlling systems aboard the apparently abandoned vessel. Either possibility carried significant tactical implications for their approach. In the galley below, Gwen had quietly assembled her training group under the pretense of emergency meal preparation. The 16 sailors she'd been working with understood that something significant was developing, and their nervous energy was channeled into useful activity, preparing combat rations and medical supplies that might be needed if the situation escalated. "Listen carefully," she said in a low voice that wouldn't carry beyond their immediate group. "We may be boarding that merchant vessel within the next few hours. Everything we've trained for, room clearing, close quarters combat, tactical communication, it might all become very real, very quickly." Seaman Jackson checked his sidearm for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, his young face set with determination that couldn't quite mask his underlying anxiety. "What do you think we're going to find over there, Petty Officer Reynolds?" I think we're going to find out why 3 ships and 96 people have disappeared without a trace, Gwen replied grimly. And I think whoever's responsible is still in the area, watching to see how we respond. Her instincts, honed by years of special operations experience, were screaming warnings that the senior staff on the bridge hadn't yet recognized. The Northern Gateway's position was too exposed, too obvious for genuine pirates seeking to avoid detection. It felt like bait, a carefully positioned lure designed to draw naval forces into a predetermined kill zone. She excused herself from galley duty and made her way to the bridge, where Captain Martinez was coordinating the approach to the merchant vessel. The tactical situation had evolved significantly in the past hour, with additional intelligence suggesting that whatever they were facing possessed capabilities far beyond typical piracy operations. "Captain, request permission to speak privately," she said, keeping her voice carefully neutral despite the urgency she felt. Martinez glanced around the busy bridge, then nodded toward his sea cabin. "Make it quick, petty officer. We'll be in the boarding range within 30 minutes. Once the door was secured, Gwen spoke rapidly and directly. "Sir, this feels like an ambush setup. Professional pirates don't leave multi-million-dollar cargo ships floating intact for naval forces to investigate. Either this is a trap or something went very wrong with whatever operation captured that vessel." "Explain your reasoning." "The positioning is too convenient, visible from maximum radar range, stationary in open water where we have to approach across several miles of exposed sea. If I wanted to lure a destroyer into a kill zone, this is exactly how I'd do it." She moved to the small chart table. "Unknown electrical activity suggests remote monitoring or control systems. Someone may be watching our approach right now, waiting for us to commit to a boarding action." Martinez absorbed this assessment. Gwen's concerns aligned with his own growing unease about the situation, but turning away from a potential rescue scenario would require justification that might be difficult to provide to Fleet Command. "What do you recommend?" "Minimal boarding party, maximum standoff distance for the Meridian, full combat loadout for anyone going aboard that ship. And sir," she paused, knowing her next words would reveal more about her background than she'd intended, "I recommend I lead the boarding party. My experience with this type of scenario may be the difference between bringing your people home alive or not." The request hung between them like a challenge to everything they'd established about her role aboard the Meridian. Martinez saw past the galley worker facade to the professional operator beneath, recognizing both the necessity of her expertise and the personal cost she was willing to pay to protect his crew. "Denied," he said finally. "You'll accompany the boarding party as a technical advisor, but Lieutenant Morrison retains tactical command. I can't officially authorize a petty officer to lead a combat mission regardless of her actual qualifications." It was a compromise that acknowledged her abilities while maintaining the command structure necessary for official accountability. Gwen nodded her understanding, knowing that once they were aboard the Northern Gateway, tactical realities would dictate leadership regardless of formal hierarchies. 25 minutes later, the Meridian's rigid hull inflatable boat approached the cargo ship's starboard side, carrying 8 sailors armed with assault rifles and wearing full combat gear. Lieutenant Morrison commanded the boarding party, but everyone understood that Petty Officer Reynolds would be calling the tactical shots once they encountered whatever awaited them aboard the silent vessel. The Northern Gateway loomed above them as they approached the accommodation ladder, her rust-streaked hull rising 4 stories from the waterline to her deck edge. No faces appeared at the railings, no voices challenged their approach, no signs of life disturbed the eerie silence that surrounded the abandoned ship. "Electrical systems are definitely active," reported Hayes, studying readings from his electronic surveillance equipment. "Multiple power sources, some kind of transmitting equipment, and what looks like automated systems running throughout the ship." Gwen felt the familiar pre-combat alertness flooding her system, heightened awareness, controlled adrenaline, the mental clarity that came with accepting the possibility of imminent violence. Her trainees were performing well under pressure, moving with the disciplined precision she drilled into them over the past weeks. But as they prepared to board the Northern Gateway, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple piracy investigation. The electrical activity, the strategic positioning, the complete absence of the crew, it all pointed toward an operation with military-level planning and execution. "Remember your training," she told Jackson quietly as they prepared to climb aboard. "Trust your instincts, watch your teammates' backs, and be ready for anything. Whatever happened to the crew of this ship, we're not going to let it happen to us." The accommodation ladder creaked ominously under their weight as the boarding party climbed toward the deck of the merchant vessel, each step taking them closer to answers that might prove more terrifying than the questions they'd been asking. The deck of the Northern Gateway stretched out before them like a metal graveyard. Cargo containers stacked in precise rows that created shadowy canyons between towering walls of steel. The boarding party moved in tactical formation across the sun-baked deck plates, their boots echoing hollowly in the unnatural silence that seemed to press against them from all directions. Lieutenant Morrison signaled for the team to halt beside the ship's superstructure, while Hayes swept the area with electronic detection equipment. The readings were immediately troubling. Multiple active transmitters throughout the vessel, sophisticated jamming equipment that was suppressing most radio frequencies, and what appeared to be motion sensors positioned at strategic intervals along the deck. "This isn't an abandoned ship," Gwen whispered into her tactical microphone. "Someone's turned it into a surveillance platform. We're being watched right now." Before Morrison could respond, a new sound cut through the Mediterranean air, the distinctive whine of high-performance engines approaching at speed. From the Meridian's direction came urgent radio chatter as radar operators detected multiple fast-moving contacts converging on their position from different compass bearings. "Boarding party, this is Meridian Actual." Captain Martinez's voice crackled through their earpieces despite the electronic interference. "We have 4 high-speed vessels approaching your position, ETA 6 minutes. Recommend immediate extraction." But extraction was no longer an option. As if triggered by the captain's transmission, hydraulic systems throughout the Northern Gateway activated with mechanical precision. Cargo containers began shifting on their automated crane systems, repositioning themselves to block sightlines and create defensive positions. Steel barriers rose from concealed compartments in the deck, transforming the merchant vessel into a fortress designed to trap anyone who had boarded her. "They've been expecting us," Morrison realized, his voice tight with the understanding that they'd walked directly into an elaborate ambush. Gwen was already moving, her tactical instincts overriding formal command structure as she led the team toward the ship's bridge. "We need to reach the control room and shut down these automated systems before those fast boats arrive. Jackson, Martinez, take points. Hayes, Kim, cover our rear approach. Everyone else, stay tight and watch for defensive positions." The ship's interior corridors had been modified extensively, with reinforced bulkheads and strategically placed barriers that channeled movement along predetermined paths. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, while hidden speakers transmit a low-frequency hum designed to disorient and confuse intruders. As they climbed toward the bridge level, the true sophistication of the operation became apparent. This wasn't piracy in any traditional sense. It was a military-grade deception operation using a captured merchant vessel as bait to lure naval forces into carefully preyed kill zones. The missing ships hadn't been destroyed or captured for ransom. They'd been converted into floating traps positioned throughout the Mediterranean shipping lanes. "Contact front." Jackson's warning came just before the first burst of automatic weapons fire erupted from a concealed position near the bridge access. The rounds sparked off steel bulkheads inches from the boarding party's heads, driving them into cover behind a reinforced doorway. Gwen assessed the tactical situation with the cold precision of someone who'd survived dozens of similar engagements. 3 shooters in elevated positions, coordinated fields of fire, professional ammunition conservation. These weren't desperate pirates, they were trained soldiers executing a predetermined defensive plan. "Hayes, can you identify their positions with thermal imaging?" 2 shooters in the bridge wing, 1 more in the communications room. They've got overlapping coverage of the main corridor and both stairwell approaches. Hayes studied his equipment readings. "But there's a ventilation access point about 20 meters back that might give us an alternate route. Morrison, take half the team and maintain suppressing fire from this position. Keep them focused on the main approach. Gwen was already moving toward the ventilation access, her movements fluid and purposeful. Jackson, Martinez, Kim, you're with me. We'll flank them through the ductwork. The ventilation system had been designed for maintenance access rather than tactical movement, but years of special operations training had taught Gwen to exploit any available route to gain positional advantage. The boarding party split into two elements, with Morrison's group maintaining steady but controlled fire, while Gwen led her flanking team through the ship's mechanical spaces. Above them, the sound of approaching engines grew louder as the fast attack boats closed to engagement range. Through the ship's steel hull, they could hear the deeper rumble of the Meridian's defensive systems activating. Her close-in weapon systems spinning up to engage aerial threats, her missile systems preparing to address surface contacts. Meridian, this is the boarding party leader. Morrison transmitted during a brief lull in the gunfire. We are engaged with hostile forces aboard the target vessel. Multiple shooters, professional equipment and tactics. Request immediate fire support on the ship's superstructure. Negative, boarding party. Cannot provide fire support with friendly forces aboard. You need to clear that vessel and extract it immediately. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. The boarding party was pinned down by professionally trained adversaries, the ship's automated defenses had trapped them aboard a floating fortress, and hostile vessels were approaching with unknown but certainly lethal intentions. Standard Navy training provided no solutions for this level of tactical complexity. But Gwen's training went far beyond standard Navy procedures. In the ventilation system above the bridge, she positioned her team for a coordinated assault that would neutralize the defensive positions and clear a path to the ship's control systems. The confined space brought back memories of similar operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, where success had depended on split-second timing and absolute commitment to violent action. On my mark, we breach simultaneously, she whispered to Jackson, Martinez, and Kim. Jackson takes the left position, Martinez takes center, Kim provides cover fire. I'll handle the communications room. Remember, these people killed the crew of this ship and probably 96 other innocent sailors. No hesitation, no mercy. Through the ventilation grate, she could see the defensive positions clearly. The hostiles were focused on Morrison's approach, their attention divided between maintaining suppressive fire and coordinating with whatever forces were aboard the approaching attack boats. It was the kind of tactical opportunity that lasted only seconds before circumstances changed. Execute, she breathed into her microphone. The next 30 seconds transformed the bridge of the Northern Gateway into a controlled storm of violence as Gwen's team emerged from concealment with overwhelming force and precision. Her trainees moved exactly as she'd taught them, fast, aggressive, and utterly committed to eliminating the threat. But even as they secured the bridge and began shutting down the ship's automated defense systems, the approaching attack boats opened fire on the USS Meridian, their weapons revealing capabilities that would fundamentally change everything the boarding party thought they understood about their situation. The bridge of the Northern Gateway erupted in sparks and smoke as Gwen's team secured the control systems, but their victory was short-lived. Through the bridge windows, they could see muzzle flashes lighting up the Mediterranean as the attacking vessels engaged the USS Meridian with weapons that no pirate organization should have possessed. Those aren't speedboats, Hayes reported, studying the tactical display they'd captured from the hostile forces. They're military patrol craft with guided missile systems, Russian-made, probably Kalashnikov-Molniya-class vessels. The implications hit Gwen like a physical blow. This wasn't a criminal operation. It was a state-sponsored military action designed to disrupt NATO shipping lanes and test Western naval responses. The missing merchant vessels had been converted into a network of surveillance and ambush platforms, creating an invisible web of threats throughout the Mediterranean. Morrison, get on the radio to Captain Martinez, she ordered, while frantically working to override the ship's communication jamming systems. Tell him those attack boats have anti-ship missiles. The Meridian needs to maintain maximum range and prepare for guided weapon engagement. But the radio systems had been too severely damaged during their assault on the bridge. Static and electronic interference made coherent communication impossible, leaving the boarding party isolated aboard a hostile vessel while their ship faced threats they couldn't warn her about. Outside, the naval engagement intensified with devastating efficiency. The first anti-ship missile struck the Meridian's port side just above the waterline, its shaped charge warhead designed to penetrate destroyer-class armor. Damage control alarms echoed across the water as the crew fought to contain flooding and maintain combat capability. "We have to shut down the jamming equipment," Gwen realized, studying the ship's electronic warfare systems. The Meridian is fighting blind because these systems are suppressing her defensive radars and communication networks. Jackson was already moving toward the communications room, his training taking over despite the chaos erupting around them. "I can handle the jamming gear if you can identify the primary transmission arrays." Negative, too dangerous to split up again. Gwen made a tactical decision that would have been impossible for her 6 months earlier, when the weight of command had driven her from special operations. "We do this together or not at all. Martinez, Kim, secure the bridge. Jackson, Hayes, you're with me. We're going to take out their electronic warfare capability and give our ship a fighting chance." The ship's electronic warfare center was located 2 decks below the bridge, protected by multiple security doors and automated defensive systems that activated as soon as they left the captured control room. But Gwen's team moved with the fluid precision of operators who'd trained together under extreme stress, each member anticipating the other's actions and providing cover where needed. They encountered 2 more hostile personnel during their descent, technicians trying to protect the jamming equipment rather than soldiers prepared for close-quarters combat. Hayes and Jackson handled the engagement with controlled aggression, neutralizing the threats efficiently while minimizing damage to the critical electronic systems they needed to disable. The electronic warfare center itself was a maze of sophisticated equipment that would have challenged even experienced technical personnel. Banks of transmitters, signal processors, and computer terminals created an environment that felt more like a modern military facility than the cargo hold of a merchant vessel. "This is way beyond anything a criminal organization could deploy," Hayes observed, studying the equipment specifications. "We're looking at military-grade electronic warfare systems worth millions of dollars. Someone with serious resources and technical expertise designed this operation." Gwen was already working to identify the primary systems that needed to be disabled. Her special operations training had included extensive instruction in electronic warfare, both offensive and defensive applications. She recognized several components that were currently jamming the Meridian's defensive systems and preventing effective coordination of the destroyer's response to the missile attack. "Hayes, can you shut down the main transmitter array? Jackson, I need you to destroy the backup power systems for the signal processors. I'm going to try to access their command system and find out how many more ships they've converted into traps like this one." What she discovered in the computer files was more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. The Northern Gateway was just one node in a network of 12 converted merchant vessels positioned throughout the Mediterranean, each one equipped with similar electronic warfare capabilities and automated defensive systems. The operation represented months of planning and millions of dollars in equipment, suggesting coordination at the highest levels of whatever organization was responsible. But more immediately concerning was the tactical display showing the current engagement between the USS Meridian and the attacking patrol boats. Even with her superior firepower and defensive systems, the destroyer was struggling against coordinated attacks from multiple directions, while her sensors remained partially compromised by the electronic jamming. "Got it," Hayes announced as the main transmitter array shut down with a satisfying electrical whine. Almost immediately, they could hear radio chatter resuming as the Meridian's communication systems came back online. Boarding party, this is Meridian Actual," Captain Martinez's voice cut through the static. "Sit rep on your status. We're taking missile fire and need immediate intelligence on hostile capabilities." Gwen grabbed the portable radio that Morrison had been carrying. "Meridian Actual, this is a boarding party. We've secured partial control of the enemy vessel and disabled their jamming systems. Be advised, you're facing 4 Molnia-class patrol boats with guided missile capability. This is a state-sponsored military operation, not piracy. Recommend maximum engagement range and prepare for coordinated anti-ship missile attack." The information fundamentally changed the tactical situation. Captain Martinez could now coordinate his defensive systems effectively, using the Meridian's superior sensors and weapons to engage the patrol boats before they could close to optimal firing range for their smaller missiles. Over the next 20 minutes, the naval engagement evolved into a demonstration of why properly equipped and professionally commanded destroyers dominated smaller vessels in open-water combat. The Meridian's guided missiles found their targets with devastating accuracy, while her close-in weapons system intercepted the few enemy missiles that managed to achieve target lock. By the time the boarding party was extracted from the northern gateway, 3 of the 4 attacking vessels had been destroyed, and the 4th was fleeing toward territorial waters at maximum speed. The captured merchant vessel would provide intelligence analysts with months of information about the scope and sophistication of the operation they'd uncovered. Standing on the Meridian's deck as the sun set over the Mediterranean, Gwen watched the smoke rising from the damaged but victorious destroyer and felt something she hadn't experienced since David Chen's death: a sense of completion, of duties properly fulfilled and responsibilities honestly met. "Not bad for a galley worker," Captain Martinez observed, joining her at the rail. "Just doing my job, sir," she replied, but they both understood that her real job had never washing dishes. 3 weeks later, Gwen Reynolds received orders transferring her back to Special Operations with a promotion to Master Chief Petty Officer. The citation accompanying her Silver Star mentioned extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming odds and tactical leadership that saved numerous American lives. But the commendation that meant the most came from Seaman Jackson, who stopped by the galley on her last day aboard the Meridian. "Thank you for teaching us how to fight," he said simply, "and thank you for teaching us how to come home." The intelligence gathered from the Northern Gateway proved far more valuable than anyone had initially anticipated. Within 48 hours of the engagement, NATO intelligence analysts had identified the full scope of the operation: 12 converted merchant vessels positioned throughout critical shipping lanes, each one part of a sophisticated network designed to monitor Western naval movements and disrupt commercial traffic. The captured computer systems revealed operational details that sent shockwaves through military intelligence communities across Europe and North America. The converted vessels weren't just surveillance platforms. They were forward-deployed weapon systems capable of coordinating submarine attacks, guiding missile strikes, and providing real-time intelligence to hostile naval forces operating throughout the Mediterranean. Admiral Catherine Sterling, commander of the 6th Fleet, arrived aboard the USS Meridian via helicopter transfer 36 hours after the engagement. A career naval officer with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded immediate respect, Sterling had spent the previous day reviewing classified briefings that painted a disturbing picture of how close NATO forces had come to losing control of one of the world's most strategically important waterways. "Master Chief Reynolds," she said, finding Gwen in the ship's wardroom where she was debriefing intelligence specialists about the technical capabilities they discovered aboard the hostile vessel. "I understand congratulations are in order. Your actions prevented what could have been a significant strategic defeat for Allied forces." The promotion had been expedited through channels that Gwen hadn't known existed, cutting through bureaucratic procedures that normally took months to complete. But Admiral Sterling's presence suggested that the implications of their discovery extended far beyond a single successful engagement. "Thank you, Admiral, but the real credit belongs to the sailors who executed the mission. They performed far beyond what their training should have prepared them for." "Yes, I've read the after-action reports. Seaman Jackson, Fire Controlman Hayes, Petty Officer Martinez, all of them have been recommended for advancement and specialized training assignments." Sterling consulted a tablet displaying personnel files, "which brings me to why I'm here personally rather than handling this through normal command channels." The Admiral gestured toward the tactical display that still showed the positions of the remaining 11 converted merchant vessels. Intelligence analysts were working around the clock to identify their exact locations and capabilities, but the network represented a threat that couldn't be addressed through conventional naval operations. These vessels are positioned in international waters, operated by personnel with diplomatic immunity, and technically owned by legitimate shipping companies with no apparent connection to hostile governments. We can't simply sink them without creating an international incident that could destabilize the entire Mediterranean region. Gwen studied the display, her tactical mind automatically analyzing the problem. 11 floating fortresses, each one capable of coordinating attacks against NATO shipping or naval forces, positioned where they couldn't be engaged through conventional military action. It was a strategic checkmate that could only be resolved through unconventional means. You need someone to board them covertly and disable their capabilities without creating evidence of military action. Exactly. And you've just demonstrated both the tactical expertise and leadership capability to plan and execute such operations. Sterling activated a secure communication link that connected them with classified planning facilities at NATO headquarters. I'm offering you command of a joint special operations task force specifically created to address this threat.
The proposal represented everything Gwen had thought she'd lost when David Chen died in Yemen: operational command, elite personnel, missions that could influence the strategic balance of power between nations. But it also represented the same weight of responsibility that had driven her to seek anonymity in the galley of a destroyer. Admiral, with respect, I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of command responsibility. My last operation resulted in the death of a good sailor who trusted my judgment. Sterling's expression softened slightly, revealing the understanding that came from decades of military leadership. Master Chief, I've lost more good people than I care to count. Officers, enlisted personnel, civilians, all of them following orders that ultimately came from decisions I made. If I let those losses prevent me from making the decisions necessary to protect the people still under my command, I'd be dishonoring their sacrifice rather than honoring it. The conversation was interrupted by urgent communication from the ship's intelligence center. Lieutenant Commander Walsh had been analyzing the data captured from the Northern Gateway and had discovered information that fundamentally changed their understanding of the threat they were facing. Admiral, Master Chief, you need to see this immediately, Walsh announced as they entered the intelligence compartment. Multiple screens displayed intercepted communications, satellite imagery, and technical schematics that painted a disturbing picture of coordination between the converted merchant vessels and submarine forces operating beneath the Mediterranean. The network isn't just providing surveillance and electronic warfare capability, Walsh explained, highlighting specific data streams on her displays. They're coordinating with at least 6 attack submarines positioned at strategic choke points throughout the region. When Allied naval forces respond to incidents involving the converted merchants, the submarines are positioned to intercept and engage them. The tactical implications were staggering. NATO forces had been operating under the assumption that they faced a series of isolated incidents involving sophisticated pirates or terrorists. In reality, they were confronting a coordinated naval strategy designed to establish control over critical shipping lanes while maintaining plausible deniability about state sponsorship. How many ships have we lost to submarine attacks that we attributed to other causes? Admiral Sterling asked grimly. Reviewing incident reports from the past 6 months, at least 4 naval vessels and 7 merchant ships showed damage patterns consistent with torpedo attacks rather than the stated causes in official reports. Walsh brought up satellite imagery showing debris fields and rescue operations. The network has been operational far longer than we realized, and they've been more successful than anyone suspected. Gwen felt the familiar weight of tactical responsibility settling across her shoulders as she studied the intelligence displays. 12 converted merchants, 6 attack submarines, unknown additional assets positioned throughout a region that handled 30% of global maritime trade. It was exactly the kind of complex, multi-layered threat that required unconventional solutions and operators willing to accept enormous personal risk. Admiral, if I accept command of this task force, I'll need complete operational autonomy and access to personnel from across all NATO Special Operations units. This can't be solved through normal military channels or conventional tactical approaches. Agreed. You'll have whatever resources you need and autonomy to coordinate directly with Allied intelligence services. Sterling paused, studying Gwen's expression. But I need to know that you're committed to seeing this through, regardless of the personal cost. We can't afford to have mission leadership compromised by hesitation or self-doubt. The question struck to the heart of everything Gwen had been struggling with since Yemen. Could she trust her judgment when lives depended on her decisions? Could she bear the responsibility of command, knowing that some of the people following her orders might not survive to see the mission completed? But as she looked around the intelligence compartment at the young sailors who had performed so magnificently during their boarding action, she realized that leadership wasn't about avoiding the possibility of loss. It was about making decisions that gave good people the best possible chance of surviving while accomplishing missions that protected others. "I accept command, Admiral, but I have one condition." "Name it." The personnel who executed the boarding action on the Northern Gateway, Jackson, Hayes, Martinez, Kim, and the others, they're the core of this task force. They've proven they can operate effectively under extreme conditions, and they understand the nature of the threat we're facing. Sterling nodded her approval. "Done. You'll also have access to SEAL teams, SAS operators, and other specialized personnel as needed, but your core team comes from the people who've already demonstrated they can follow your leadership into combat and bring each other home." 3 hours later, as Admiral Sterling's helicopter departed the USS Meridian, Gwen stood on the flight deck watching the Mediterranean sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In 6 months, she'd gone from washing dishes in anonymity to commanding a joint special operations task force responsible for neutralizing one of the most sophisticated naval threats NATO had faced since the Cold War. The irony wasn't lost on her that David Chen's death, which had driven her from special operations, had ultimately led to her presence aboard the Meridian at the exact moment when
Her skills were most desperately needed. Perhaps there was no such thing as coincidence in military operations, only preparation meeting necessity under circumstances that demanded everything operators had to give. Captain Martinez approached across the flight deck, carrying a secure communication device and wearing the expression of someone who just received significant new intelligence. "Master Chief, we've got movement on 3 of the remaining converted merchants. Satellite imagery shows them altering course toward the Suez Canal approach routes. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon." Gwen accepted the communication device and felt the familiar surge of operational alertness that came with imminent action. Her task force would be assembled within 48 hours, her mission parameters would be finalized within 72 hours, and within a week she'd be leading operations that could determine whether NATO maintained control over the Mediterranean or ceded strategic advantage to hostile forces. As the USS Meridian continued her patrol through waters now free of the invisible network of threats that had claimed 3 merchant vessels and their crews, Gwen realized that some responsibilities weren't burdens to be avoided. They were privileges to be earned and honors to be upheld by those capable of bearing their weight. The war for control of the Mediterranean was just beginning, and she intended to ensure that good people like David Chen hadn't died in vain. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.